Welcome to Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder, author, investor, and CEO of Netcom Learning. We'd like to welcome Zvi Band to the studio today. Zvi is the CEO and founder of the CRM firm Contactually, and he's the author of the book, Success is in Your Sphere, Leverage the Power of Relationships to Achieve Your Business Goals, and he's here to tell us more. Zvi, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Shelleys, for having me today.
So start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for someone who wrote a book all about relationship building and speaks regularly about it, I should not be the one talking about it. I'm actually an introverted software developer by trade. My joke is that like my freshman year of college, I wanted to go home every weekend because I didn't want to have to talk to people. But early on in my career, I realized that relationships were this incredibly important asset of mine. I went from working for a large government consulting firm to all of a sudden being CTO of an enterprise software company that was acquired, then started my own consulting firm and was working with the likes of Ford and CBS and Volkswagen. And I look back, it's all because I happened to know the right people, or more importantly, the right people knew me. And so that's what really set me on a path to just develop first tools around relationship building. And of course now then, that resulted in a book.
What prompted you to actually write a book about relationship building?
Yeah, no, really great question. So for the past 8 years, I've been co-founder and CEO of a company called Contactually. We're a CRM platform that helps relationship-oriented professionals stay in touch with the relationships that are important for them, right? So think of it as a CRM tool, but instead of it being focused on business deals, it's focused on relationship building. And one of the interesting things is as we stayed very close to our users and watched how they work, that everyone seemed to figure out how to use our software, but there was something missing, that most people lack strategy. Like when we say, all right, now it's time to go follow up with someone, they're cool, what do I say, right? Or when they're thinking about organizing their network or figuring out who to talk to, well, who should I be talking to? Like what relationships are important for me? And so we knew that there was something missing. It was like giving a chef's knife to someone who doesn't know how to cook. And so the idea behind the book was, all right, let's help people who want to build and maintain relationships, who want to grow their business. Let's give them the strategy to be able to solve that.
And I know you mentioned that you're an introvert, but I would say that anybody could really benefit from reading your book, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Like, who would you say the right audience was for?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say at a high level, it's any relationship-oriented professional. And I actually am someone that thought early on when I was invited to new hire networking events that I'm like, oh, that's not for me. I'm an introvert. My job is to be behind the computer, and that's all I need to do. But actually, studies have shown that introverts sometimes actually make better salespeople and better relationship builders. Why? It's because we are able to connect much more deeply with individuals, and we also, because it's not innate to us, we have to put strategies in place. So that means that the first few networking events that I went to, I was sitting in my car, absolutely terrified, going, I don't want to go into this, but I planned in place, saying, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk in there. And I'm not going to try and meet 50 people and exchange business cards. I'm just going to try and meet one person. And you go deep on that one relationship, and that one relationship ends up becoming a huge asset for the course of your life.
Now, your book, you say, isn't necessarily about closing a deal or working the room per se. What is your book about then?
Yeah, great question. So I think if you talk to any business professional who's achieved some level of success, they would agree with the belief that their relationships are their most important asset, right? And that those relationships may yield business opportunities, they may yield jobs, partners, so many different things over the course of your career. And the important thing, though, is that we have to treat that as an asset, right? That's why relationships are our most important asset. So just like the dollars in our bank account, just like so many other aspects of our life, it's something that can go up, it's something that can go down, and it's something that we can invest in if we put the right tools in place. So that was the real idea behind this book, that behind the relationship building, is that everyone knows that it's important, just like everyone knows that, like, yes, I want more money, but they're not necessarily sure of what they do next, what they do today or tomorrow to be able to nurture and grow that asset.
Tell us a little bit about social connections. You talk a little bit about social connections and the importance of them in your book. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that makes human beings unique from most other species is that we're social creatures, at core, right? We would not survive the first few minutes out of the womb if it weren't for, the family and for the network and the support system built by us. We'd pretty soon eat by tigers and bears and wouldn't be able to feed ourselves. And that extends through the rest of our lives, in that we rely on those social connections to be able to understand, well, not only who is safe, but who should I trust, who should I work with, right? That's why most jobs at a senior level are sourced from relationship building, and it applies in so many other ways too. There was a study of a German bank, and it found that when customers were referred to the bank, they had a 25% higher deposit rate, right? So because they trust that bank more and they'll use that bank more. So social connections are innate in us as human beings. And at a business level, people do business with people they know and trust. And so the question for us is, for the people that we want to be working with, how do we build and maintain that social connection?
You also talk about the intrinsic and extrinsic barriers to building and keeping relationships in your book. Can you define what you mean by that and what some of those are?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's face it, human beings, we haven't necessarily evolved that much in the past, few hundred years, but the world around us has changed significantly. We live in this amazing world of technology where we can be connected to so many people around the world, but other people can also be connected to us and to the people that we want to work with. The problem is the human mind hasn't changed, right? Robin Dunbar did this amazing piece of research in the 80s that discovered that the average human can only maintain around 150 social connections at any point in time. Okay, well, how many LinkedIn connections do I have? How many Facebook friends do I have? How many Twitter followers do I have? There's something missing there. There's a gap being created. So what's happening nowadays is that we're going a mile wide, but an inch deep in our relationship. So it's no surprise that when Cigna did a survey of 20,000 Americans, 50% reported feeling some aspect of loneliness, which is crazy in this world today. And so that's really one of the big challenges of why we need to be much more intentional around trying to build relationships with people we care about.
Now, you mentioned this study that was done, and I know in your book you outline some other scientific research that's been done to highlight the nature of relationships and relationship building. What are some key takeaways and learnings you could share with us based on the research that you did?
So one of the really interesting pieces of research that's also come out is this idea of the time decay of memory, right? And most people know that we forget things. If I can't remember what I had for breakfast 2 weeks ago, how am I going to figure out who I met with, or more importantly, how are they going to remember the information about me so I can build a relationship with over that period of time? And unfortunately, research shows that there is some time decay of memory, but we haven't been able to put any real science. There are some people, and you and I both know people who can go around a room and can remember absolutely every piece of information. It's something called highly superior autobiographical memory. And most people don't have that, right? And so that means that for us, we need to be much more intentional around that kind of work.
So as we get older, our social networks tend to shrink. Why does that happen?
Yeah, so I think one is when we talk about the extrinsic and intrinsic things around us. One, we're just surrounded by fewer people, right? Think of school and college and work and family, everything's much bigger. So we tend to narrow down over time. We are much more insular, focused on our relationships. But you're right, there is a bigger issue that as we get older, we sometimes become more set in our ways, and that can lead to greater aspects of loneliness.
And what kind of ramifications then does that have from a business perspective and building relationships to help us grow professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that means that oftentimes, while we seem to be connected to so many people, think, if I keep using LinkedIn for the next, 20 years or so of my career, the number of people that I'll be connected to, but how many of them have I actually spoken to in 5 years? How many of them, if I reached out and asked a question, would they even know who I am? And so that can sometimes be super limiting to us because it limits our options, our availability, because we're not getting access to those loose connections that might bring with it new job opportunities, new business opportunities, new ways of thinking that we were exposed to so much as younger professionals when we're surrounded by all these amazing people with tons of energy.
So let's get a little bit more into the strategy around building relationships and building our networks. What are some goals that we should set for ourselves when we think about how we want to build our professional network? How do we go about it?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the biggest pitfalls that we see so many people run into, and this is based off of years of working in this space, is that oftentimes people entered in with no goals. Right? We go to networking events or we go to conferences and we're exchanging business cards, but we don't necessarily have a good idea of who are the people we're trying to meet with. And so starting off, it is important to figure out, well, what are the goals I'm trying to achieve? And for each of us, that can be different, right? It could be different on the stage of our career, the job we're in. And so starting off and trying to identify, well, what am I trying to achieve maybe over the next 6 months, the next year, maybe over the course of my career? It could be I want to get a new job. It could be I want to grow my business. It could be I want to expand my way of thinking. I want to move to a different career path. It could be so many different things, and therefore the asks out of our network might be different, right? It could be something as simple as I would love referrals to other people that I might work with. It might be social capital, so I can leverage it later on. I might sometimes it's the pure active connection I care about. For me, as a company, we raised $12 million in capital, and so clearly, when I was seeking out when I was going out and building relationships in my network, I was looking for introductions to investors, and when I was working with investors, I was looking for eventual investment. And that was a very specific strategy that I was able to put in place to back up that goals. So as long as we go in with a clear idea of what the goals we're trying to achieve, then everything else ladders up from that.
And I think this is a great way to avoid failure and burnout as well, right? Because you're a lot more purposeful in how you're approaching your networking, rather than just going to these networking events or trying to just approach it in a way where you're not really sure, you're hoping something comes out of it, but you're not going in with specific goals and strategies.
Exactly. If we have an idea of what we're trying to achieve over the next few years, we can then better start to prioritize our time around it. But otherwise, if we're just completely directionless, like if we just start going for a run without having an idea of how far we want to run or what direction we want to go to or what we're trying to run to, we'll eventually go, well, why am I doing this, right? Why am I spending, my Tuesday evenings, in a really dark bar meeting people? Why am I spending all of these times in coffee meetings when I'm not necessarily sure if this is going to be beneficial to either of us over a long period of time? So as long as we're clear with that, and then of course, reframe that every once in a while, right? We're going to be in different points in time in our career where we're going to sit back and say, hey, have my goals shifted, right? It may be at one point to find a job. Well, hopefully you find that career and check, okay, well, what's my next thing? Okay, well, I'm trying to figure out how I level up in my career. Okay, that's a different goal with an entirely different outcome, entirely different sets of people that can help with that. And so we'll all go through phases. So not only is it important to have goals, but to be able to reset those goals, every so often.
Can you give us some specific actions around building these relationships so that we don't get burned out, so that we don't feel like we fail, maybe around a certain thing that you're trying to achieve. Let's just say it's trying to get a job. What is the approach that you would take?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the book really unpacks the capital strategy, which is something that we've really understood just after working with tens of thousands of business professionals and entrepreneurs to really understand, well, what is that strategy, right? So again, we start off with one of the top things, which is having a goal in mind, right? One of the first things that we do, and which is the C in capital, is consistency, right? And one of the things we have to understand is that relationships are a long-term play, right? It's not like if I reach out to 100 people right now and I book 10 coffee meetings, and from that I'm gonna get 5 business opportunities per se, right? If I'm trying to go out and build a job, get a new job, I don't reach out to 100 people in my network and all of a sudden I have got 10 job offers, right? Yes, those kind of things can happen, but really it's about what is that long-term play that we're trying to achieve. Now the problem is we face the tyranny of the urgent these days. We're driven by the emails at the top of our inbox, the push notifications on our phone, the text messages coming in, and we think less about, well, what's happening down the line, right? Even think of like, the second or third screen of your inbox. Those are people that you've already started completely forgetting about. And so in order to build consistency, we need to be strategic around how do I ensure that I have enough time in my life, in my day, to be focusing and investing in the relationships that will not pay off for years down the line. So there are some simple tools you can do, like block time off on your calendar, an hour every other day, call it your hour of power. Giving yourself rewards. So saying, hey, if I reach out to 5 people today that I wouldn't otherwise, I'm gonna go to the coffee shop and buy myself that really nice drink that I want to. Some way of tricking ourselves. So we say, hey, this isn't necessarily something that's gonna help me right now, but I feel good about doing that.
I love the idea of rewarding yourself. I think that's the one missing thing for a lot of people, where there might be people who sort of set goals for themselves and block off a little bit of time, but something comes up and then they kind of just say, all right, I'll get back to that. But if you kind of put that reward factor in and say, hey, okay, I'm going to really reward myself if I actually accomplish this, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, as humans, we're wired for first order rewards, right? And for thinking about how does something help us now, not as much like second or third degree things, right? If all we were doing is thinking about, hey, how can I be my healthiest self and best shape 3 years from now, we would all be eating salads and going to the gym every morning. But instead, we're eating donuts and watching TV, right? And so it's kind of thinking about things like that of like, all right, well, how do I block time off? How do I help us? And those are key aspects that you'll see throughout the capital strategy.
Mm-hmm. Tell us what the different parts of the capital strategy are and how they help us actually build and maintain relationships.
Yeah, great question. So at a high level, the capital strategy starts off with C, consistency. How do we ensure that we're building the behavior and doing the actions that will pay off for us over a long period of time? A is for aggregate. We need to be able to identify all of the relationships we know across all networks and across all parts of our life. From there, P is for prioritize, where we think about how do we identify out of that big group of people the relationships that will best help the goals that we talked about earlier. From there, I is for investigate. The more we know about our relationships, the deeper trust we can build. So how do we investigate? How do we leverage all the information that's available or that we're even hearing to be able to build a deeper rapport? From there, timely engagement, of course, to make sure that we're staying in touch every so often. And how do we set that cadence or identify other opportunities to reach out? A is for adding value. It's not about just following up and staying top of mind, but it's actually how do I add value to my relationships? How do I invest in the people that I care about? And then finally, L is for leverage. If this is something that we want to be doing over a long period of time, we have to figure out how to make it easier and easier and easier to do in order to keep that wheel spinning.
There's one thing that you talk about in your book, and that's the icky factor of relationship building.
Yeah, and this is definitely a big thing, and it's something we have a lot of people come to us with fear, right? When I talk about our relationships are our most important asset, all of a sudden I'm like, well, are people assets to us? Am I using people, right? All of a sudden we do feel like that sleazy networker, going in a room and slinging business cards just to be able to try and do business with you and cold call you and things like that. The truth is, again, people do business with people they know. And so when we're building relationships, it's not just because it's not just because we want something out of you. It's because we want to surround ourselves with people that we like to work with. It's building that real connection, right? I learned early on in my career that the best businesses are built just as much by who we don't work with as who we do work with. And so we're trying to build that personal connection too. And so, yeah, that's why we shouldn't necessarily go in, and we're not trying to necessarily seek transactions, but we're trying to connect with the people and trying to genuinely help that. And of course, that helps with every aspect. Helps with finding jobs, helps with customer relationships. That we're not just trying to get a dollar or a transaction out of you. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make your business successful, and we truly believe by working with you, we can make that business successful, which of course helps our business in return.
And so what are some of the habits we can build around that? What are some habits we can build to make sure we are doing all the parts of this capital strategy?
Yeah, and so the C in consistency, that's where it really comes into play. So making sure that we're blocking off time in our calendar for that. And that's the time that we say, okay, I'm not going to respond to email. I'm not going to pick up the phone when it comes in. All I'm going to be doing is identifying the important relationships that I need to be staying in touch with, not the urgent actions that are being put in front of me. And so blocking off time is really important. There are other habit building techniques like giving yourself that small reward after you do something that says, hey, okay, this is a good thing. I can keep doing that. Of course, you can think about bringing on an accountability coach and things like that. But in order to keep doing that, the last L in capital is for leverage. Making it easier to do is really helpful too.
Tell us how we can build a database of our networks and the people that we've met in an effective way without just it being, collecting business cards and then not really knowing where I put this one or what to sort of do with them next.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best solution, and this is the A in aggregate, is to really try and pull in every relationship you've ever had, right? Which seems crazy at first, but what we're trying to do is, again, if the human memory decays, well, computer information doesn't. And so how do we build that digital copy of everyone that we've ever engaged with? Yeah, that means family and friends and that random plumber and and anyone you've ever met, pulling that into one place. Now, of course, there are tons of different systems out there. I always say that the best CRM is the one that you're actually going to be using. For some, it's a full-fledged tool like a Salesforce or a Contactually or a Sugar CRM. Other people are really great with using an Excel spreadsheet and saying, hey, that works really well for me. I know many people whose CRM is a stack of business cards on their desk, because they can kind of organize it and they can see it and they can visualize it. So whatever CRM works for you, great. What matters is that we're thinking about how do I pull in all of these relationships into one place in order to figure out who I need to talk to.
Can you provide tips on how to approach the art of small talk?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, most people skip over small talk these days. But small talk is this incredibly important tool, because if we're trying to build a relationship and not just get a transaction, well, we want to know and we want to care about these people. And so, the important thing first and foremost is, to pay attention to small talk, right? If someone's talking about the traffic that they had coming in, don't just say, all right, like whatever, but like say, oh, cool, well, where are you coming from today, right? If someone, just makes an odd remark about the weather, like inquire and say, oh, yeah, like what do you like? Or what do you do? Like, what do you do during this season? So to be able to show that you actually care about that person, right? Why are they in this line of work? When you're sharing information around weekend plans, on a Friday afternoon, well, dig in and kind of actually be interested in what they're doing that weekend. Don't just kind of say it as like just a social norm. But then, most importantly, capture that information, right? Again, information storage is pretty much free these days. So make a point of capturing all that information because you'll never know how you can leverage that later on. There was an example I saw, and we talk about in the book, where I was exchanging just small talk with someone as we were walking out of a coffee shop, and he mentioned that his kids were playing in a basketball game this weekend. And again, I inquired, oh, do your kids play basketball? Like, oh yeah, they really love it. Okay, well, instead of writing a normal boring thank you note, $10 on Amazon and a basketball with a gift note, showed up at his house the next day, right? It showed that I care about him and I know about him and I'm thinking about him as a person, not just as someone I wanted to hire.
How do you then build that into something deeper, something more authentic? How do you take it then to the next level?
Yeah, and so from there, there's definitely that art of question asking, right? That to be able to understand that person, not just about their life and their background story, but what their goals are, what their challenges are, what they're trying to achieve. And then the A in adding value is just that, right? Is that we're showing that we care about who the person is and not necessarily just the transaction. When it comes to customer relationships, are we just trying to get them to renew or to work with us again? Or do we truly want their business to be successful and we'll find as many opportunities for that business to be successful? Now, of course, there are many different ways of adding value, right? There's just, direct connection, even just, saying, hey, thinking of you. That's a valuable experience because it's showing that we care about that person. There's solving business problems. There's making connections to others. Or there's even, creating some aspect of community, like inviting them to an event or, posting a dinner for people you care about so they can meet other people. There's so many different ways of adding value. We actually dedicated 2 books of it, or 2 chapters of the book to it. What matters most, though, is that every interaction is meaningful, relevant, and authentic in some way.
How do we balance what is either not often enough or too much connection or reaching out to our networks and building those relationships?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. When it comes to timely engagement, when should I reach out is a common question. And the truth is there's no real right answer. The way to think about it, though, is that there are external triggers and internal triggers. So external triggers are incredibly valuable, right? It's looking out for opportunities where you can jump in or add value. And that's why, making sure that you're connecting with people on social media, right, matters a lot because you can understand about enough about their life and find those opportunities to build deeper rapport, right? So like when someone's changed jobs or when someone has a new kid, those are great ways to be able to say, hey, like I care about you, like congratulations on the new job, how's it going so far? It's been a few months. There are external triggers like that that we should always be on the lookout for. But beyond that, well, how do we make sure that no definite amount of time goes by without us building and investing in that relationship more? This really comes down to, frankly, what is your level of investment that you're willing to make in certain people? The thing that we have to be careful about, though, is that, well, if we say, I want to stay in touch with these 1,000 people every 30 days, right? Well, that's 1,000 additional conversations you might be having, right? What if they respond, right? And so that's why if we prioritize our relationships, the fewer they are, the more intensity we can focus on them, or the more often we can stay in touch. A baseline we say is, hey, if you think that they are somewhat important to you in some way, if they have some value and you can add value to them, just say once a quarter. And then, some people you'll find yourself like, hey, there's nothing I want to say, there's nothing I need to say to them right now. Okay, like maybe they're once every 6 months or once a year or once every 2 years. But then people that you care about and people who are seemingly responding to you, then maybe you can bring that up a little bit more. But there's no right or wrong answer as to how often to stay in touch. It's just constant tweaking of the dials.
You also talk about 3 mindsets in your book, 3 mindsets of engaging our sphere and our connections.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on what those mindsets are?
So there are 3 mindsets to be thinking about there. So there's the direct mindset, right? Where it's 2 people and we're thinking about how do I add value to this relationship? How do I help you? Maybe it's making an introduction, maybe it's solving a business problem, or just showing that we care about that person and investing in that. There's the community mindset, where again, it might just be an introduction between 2 people, that's creating some aspect of community, hosting a dinner, doing something to allow the people that you care about to connect with each other, and you're the hub of that. So that's a valuable experience. Then of course there's the broadcast mindset, right? Where we're trying to add value to a larger audience, even if it's just a newsletter or posting on social media or things like that. That can work. It's all those together, that's where you really see the magic.
You talk about the IKEA effect of building relationships in your book.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a story about Ben Franklin. He wanted to. There was a particular opponent that he was dealing with in Congress, and in order to build a relationship with him, Ben Franklin actually tried something different, where he asked to borrow a book, right? And by borrowing that book, of course, the person who wasn't rude, he lent him the book, and from there they were able to actually build a deeper relationship. And what that story tells us is that if we want to build a relationship with someone, maybe one of the ways is to actually ask something of them first, right? To make them invest a little bit in you, because once we make that investment, we're actually much more likely to make that investment again. So that's kind of one of the concepts of the IKEA effect. They kind of make you do work, but by doing that, you're invested in that. You're invested in the store. You've already kind of gone this far. You might as well pick up a few more items, for example. And so that's a neat trick, and it's a little scary to try, if you want to work with someone, to ask something of them. But people actually like helping out. People like giving advice. People like feeling appreciated for something they do. And so, that act of going and requiring some investment of them, however small, can actually go a long way.
And finally, how do we measure success of all our efforts? If we've applied the strategy, how do we know that we're succeeding?
Great question. Well, from a short-term perspective, there are things, of course, we can look for, are my messages getting responses? Are people opening the message I send? So that's something most CRM tools will allow you to do, just to know, all right, is something happening here, or am I just kind of speaking out into the ether and no one's paying attention to me? There definitely is something that we need to be careful about. Long term, it's something that you have to have a lot of faith in, that looking off the back of the boat, as I can in my career, the most amazing things happen in my life because I can look back and say, well, it was because of that person or that relationship, or because I met that person for coffee, or I got that introduction. And so there's a certain amount of trust that we have to have. And usually we can look back in our career so far and identify the certain things that have happened because of those relationships, and have faith that will work for us longer term. Now, of course, we do have to go and have to do a check-in, every few months with our goals and saying, hey, has something happened that has netted towards our goals, right? If not, maybe there's a strategy shift. Maybe I have to be careful about the relationships I'm building. Maybe I have to focus my efforts. Maybe I have to find different ways of adding value. For me, I thought that sending out a personal newsletter to all my relationships, that would work really well. And it did for a period of time, and then people stopped responding. So I saw that strategy wasn't working anymore. So now I focus a lot more on building personal relationships or sending books to people I care about. So I'm much more tactical around that. So as long as we're doing that check-in to say, hey, am I getting the results, in an interim basis or long term, we can be in much better shape.
Well, these were great strategies and great advice you've given. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to
Michelle,
have
thank you so much for having me.
And we'll see you next time on Sarder TV.